Hello everybody and welcome to my review of Excalibur and Excalibur Umbra, and I suppose Excalibur Prime as well, though Excalibur Prime is no longer obtainable in the game. Now Excalibur and Excalibur Umbra are essentially the same Warframe. Umbra has slightly better stats, so he has more armor and energy, though unlike a regular primed frame, his toolkit is a little bit different. On the standard Excalibur as well as Excalibur Prime, their passive is very straightforward. They get 10% bonus damage and attack speed if they're wielding either a sword, a pair of dual swords, a katana, a rapier, or their Exalted Blade. And while Umbra has this passive as well, he has an extra passive on top of that, because whenever you go into transference mode, so you hop out into your own operator, the Umbra itself will become sentient and act kind of like a spectre, using the weapon you have equipped as well as some abilities. This is actually really cool, not only because it uses the weapons you have equipped and it will even switch into melee if enemies come too close to him, but the abilities he casts will actually take into account the mods you have equipped on him. So as far as passives goes, these are definitely not too bad. And that's enough about that, so let's talk about Excalibur's abilities. So Excalibur's first ability is called Slash Dash, and it's pretty much what you would expect. It's a dash with a slash. The ability is very cheap, only costing 25 energy to begin with, which is of course affected by power efficiency, so we can bring it down even further. And the way it works is extremely straightforward. You press a button, Excalibur dashes towards your crosshair and up to 12 meters away, which is affected by power range, and he will attempt to target an enemy in a cone in front of him, and if there is an enemy, he will slash them for 250 damage, most of which is slash. Now the damage of Slash Dash is actually affected by many things, which is really cool. We have power strength, which is kind of obvious, but then we have the melee combo counter, which Slash Dash itself actually counts towards, so as you slash dash through enemies, you will build your combo counter, though rather slowly. Then there is Excalibur's passive, so if you're wielding one of the weapons that Excalibur has mastery over, you will get 10% extra damage from that. And last but not least, we also have some mods that you can put on your melee weapon, but not all of them, and it also doesn't take into account the actual stats on the melee weapon. So the mods that affect Slash Dash from your melee weapon are generic damage increases, so stuff like Pressure Point, slash-based mods like Buzzkill, and even elemental mods like Brain Fever Strike. This is actually a very cool first ability. It's cheap and the damage on it can be somewhat decent if you build for it, so you have a good stat stick and some power strength. Plus the dash isn't the worst way to get around. Now there are two augments for Slash Dash and they're both pretty basic. The first one is called Surging Dash, and this just increases the number of combo hits you get from each Slash Dash by 4, so instead of getting 1 at a time, which is very slow, you actually get 5, which is much better. And you can push the number of bonus combo hits from this augment even higher with more power strength. And the second one is called Purging Slash, and this makes it so that when you slash dash through an ally, they will have 4 debuffs removed and 100% of their shields restored. Though this unfortunately doesn't affect you as the caster or your companion or even defense objectives, it's strictly for other players. Excalibur's second ability is called Radio Blind, where he raises and then shatters his Exalted Blade, blinding nearby enemies. This ability costs 50 energy to begin with, which is affected by power efficiency. It will blind enemies that are up to 25 meters away, which is affected by power range, and it will blind them for 15 seconds, which is affected by power duration. Now, while the enemies are initially stunned by Radio Blind, they will eventually start to waddle around aimlessly, not really knowing what to do, and while they're doing that, you can perform melee finishers on them. Now, the cool thing about Radio Blind is that it has no cooldown, so you can spam it as much as you want as long as you have energy for it, and it's also where Umbra differs a little bit from the Excalibur and Excalibur Prime, because he doesn't have Radio Blind, he instead uses Radial Howl. Now this is basically exactly the same as Radio Blind, but with a little bonus on top, because it will also reset sentient damage adaptation if they're within range of your howl. And that's pretty much it for this ability, so let's check out the augment, which is called Radiant Finish, and all this does is increase the damage enemies take from finishers by 300% when they're blinded by Radio Blind or Radial Howl. Luckily it works on both of them. This is actually a pretty cool augment, especially since the bonus finisher damage is affected by power strength, so you can push it well beyond 300%. Excalibur's third ability is called Radio Javelin, where he will stab his Exalted Blade into the ground, which then launches javelins that will impale nearby enemies. This ability is pretty expensive, starting at 75 energy, but you can manipulate this by adding or subtracting power efficiency, and it's once again extremely straightforward. So you press a button, you stab the ground, which then causes 12 javelins to target enemies that are up to 25 meters away, which is affected by power range, and hit them for 1000 damage, which is distributed equally between impact, puncture, puncture and slash. Now, while the damage of radio javelin is affected by power strength, the number of javelins is unfortunately not, so you are always stuck at 12 javelins per cast. Also, while radio javelin does need line of sight to target an enemy with one of those javelins, it will sort of try to spawn the javelins in weird places to try and hit enemies that are only partially obscured. And finally, we also have an augment for radio javelin called Furious Javelin, and this one is once again extremely straightforward. What it does is it increases your melee damage by 10% for every enemy hit by one of your javelins for 16 seconds, with the duration of the buff being affected by power duration and the power of the buff being affected by power strength. And Excalibur's fourth and final ability is called Exalted Blade, where he finally unleashes his Exalted Blade and goes ham. Now, this is a full-on exalted melee weapon, a sword to be more specific, so it does get 10% extra damage and attack speed from Excalibur's passive that can be modded separately in the arsenal. It costs 25 energy to activate, which is affected by power efficiency, and then drains 2.5 energy every second, which is affected by both efficiency and power duration. Now, attacks with the Exalted Blade will do at base 250 damage, most of which is slash. However, every swing of the sword will also send out an energy wave that will do just as much damage as the strike itself. This wave travels at 15 meters per second and lasts for 2.5 seconds, so it will travel a total distance of 37.5 meters. And the orientation of the energy wave corresponds to the orientation of the initial swing, so if you do a horizontal swing, it will fire out a horizontal wave. Now, while I do believe the wave has infinite punch through as far as punching through enemies is concerned, its duration is reduced by 0.5 seconds for every enemy it hits. And on top of all of that, the wave has pretty bad damage fall off, so it loses most of its damage as it's flying through the air. But that kind of doesn't matter because the ability is just really strong. Even though the actual stats are not that crazy, 250 base damage, and then it has 15% status and crit chance and a standard 200% crit multi. The main strength of the Exalted Blade, aside from its mechanics, which are fantastic, is how its damage is calculated and scaled. The damage is mostly affected by the mods you actually put on it in your arsenal, since as I've said already, this is its own weapon that you mod separately from everything else. But you can increase it even further by adding more power strength, and it's also affected by the melee combo counter, though here the melee combo counter is not that big of a thing because you only get a combo hit with the Exalted Blade if you actually hit the enemy with the weapon itself, not the wave. Now, this on its own is already really good, but what really pushes it way above good is its augment called Chromatic Blade. What this does is gives your Chromatic Blade a 300% status increase and basically the Chroma passive. It basically changes the base damage of your Exalted Blade, with reddish colors giving you heat, bluish colors giving you electricity, white and blackish colors giving you cold, and greenish color giving you toxin. Even better than that though, as if 300% extra status wasn't enough, the bonus status you get from this is affected by power strength. This means that you can completely ignore status when modding for the Exalted Blade and go for pure crit and as much damage as you can squeeze on it and still have a hybrid setup in the end. This is really powerful, especially since most Exalted Blade builds will run moderately high power strength to begin with. One thing to bear in mind with the Exalted Blade though is that you don't want to be too slide happy, because doing a slide attack will actually trigger Radial Blind, and while in the past this used to be free, it's not anymore. It literally just casts Radial Blind. It has the same properties and it also costs the same amount of energy. I definitely consider Excalibur to be in the upper tier of frames, which is kind of awesome seeing as he is one of the starter frames you can pick up when you first get into the game. I think some people underestimate Excalibur because he's one of the 3 starter frames, but trust me, he's just an awesome brawler with a ton of damage and really good crowd control. So of course I'm going to recommend Excalibur, even though it doesn't really matter since you do get Excalibur Umbra as you progress through the different quest lines in the game. And that's pretty much it for the video, so I thank you very much for watching as always guys. I hope you've enjoyed the video and found it helpful. I would like to extend a special thank you to all the channel members. Thank you very much guys, you're awesome, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.